All right, what's going on, everyone? Got a couple quick topics here to hit on. First, a few statements put out by the United States and the United Kingdom that at the very least need a little more context. The Taliban carried out a raid in Afghanistan that killed some Islamic State fighters, and the United States shot down a supposed Iranian drone over an American patrol base in Syria. So starting out, I'll pull this article up here, and all these articles will be linked in the video description below. Defense Secretary Ben Wallace from the United Kingdom was quoted in this article as saying, quote, "That has come at a huge cost to the Russian army. We now estimate 97% of the Russian army, the whole Russian army, is in Ukraine." And if you look at the headline of this article, that's what it says. 97% of Russian army estimated to be in Ukraine, UK Defense Secretary. This type of comment, and the next one that came from the United States, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't pass the common sense test. 97% of the Russian army in Ukraine? Come on, I mean, we know there's a bunch of troops in Belarus. There's a bunch of troops all across the country at training grounds, recruiting stations, carrying out administration and logistics work. Maybe this stat needed more context, like 97% of Russian combat units are focused on the war in Ukraine. But that's very, very different than saying that 97% of the entire army is in the country. I'm not trying to pick on the British, just that 97% number is kind of a layup. Doesn't make sense. We do the same thing here in the United States. And again, I don't think this is helping anyone. So General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, earlier this week said, quote, "Russia is now a global pariah and the world remains inspired by Ukrainian bravery and resilience. In short, Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically." Again, what are we gaining by doing this? There's very valid arguments, I think, to be had about the whole Russia being a global pariah, how they're viewed on the world stage, how this has impacted their economy. Yes, absolutely. But to say that Russia has already lost this war strategically, operationally, and tactically, that's going to be hard to back up. I mean, right now in the middle of February, we've seen Russia take more territory in Ukraine than they have in quite a while. It's not a lot, but they are still moving. So how do you reconcile that with the statement that Russia has already lost the war? The thing I get frustrated with in this sense is these things get pulled out as sound bites, and you have people who aren't following the war very closely, and they hear that 97% of the Russian army is in Ukraine and that Russia has already lost. I think that paints a very different picture of what the next few weeks, months, and potentially even years could look like in this conflict. Moving on to Afghanistan, the Taliban carried out a raid in Kabul earlier this week that killed 3 Islamic State fighters and captured 1. This isn't really a new fight. It's been raging since about 2015. We just don't hear a lot about it since the U.S. withdrawal. But if you look back when U.S. forces were in country, there were periods of time where the U.S. would be fighting the Taliban, say in the south, the Islamic State in the east, and then there were portions of the country in the east still where the Islamic State and the Taliban were fighting one another. It's kind of confusing to get at why these two groups can't get along, but at a very high level, the Taliban are a rather nationalistic group focused on establishing and running the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, so they're very focused inside their borders. The Islamic State Khorasan province, which is this group here, is also a Sunni jihadist group. It's an offshoot from the Islamic State, which tends to be a little more regional, global focused than the Taliban. And they follow the Salafist school of thinking, which is a little more hardline than the Taliban and tends to look down on non-Salafists. In short, these two probably aren't going to be getting along anytime soon. Finally, U.S. Central Command put out that on February 14th, U.S. forces in Syria shot down a suspected Iranian drone conducting reconnaissance over mission support site Conoco. That is in the northeastern part of the country, Deir ez-Zor province. It was a small, unarmed, short-range reconnaissance drone, so likely launched by an Iranian-backed force somewhere nearby. I have a feeling that most people don't know or forgot that we still have troops on the ground in Syria. We do. They're operating under Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve. The stated goal there is to work with our regional allies to defeat the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, who still is operating in certain portions of both Iraq and Syria. Now, whether you think we should have troops there or shouldn't, we do. So long as they're on the ground, we'll keep an eye on what's going on in that part of the world. But that'll do it for now. We'll see y'all next time.